Hello, everyone, and welcome to this audio podcast. This audio podcast series, as part of a Spectra dossier. This audio podcast as part of a Science Squadron. This audio podcast as part of a SZtorm. This audio podcast as part of a Storm Robotics production. In this audio podcast, um, a little bit around in the initial strategy and as part of the initial strategy in regard to peer reviewed and published works, peer reviewed and published works from 2015 and 16, looking at um, looking at the Lord Mayor of Bristol Southwest, in the United Kingdom's blood and solid organ transplant, a solid organ transplant initiative or campaign. So in this audio podcast, a little bit in regard to in regard to the initial initiative, around looking at the educational perspective. So there is a need to there had been a need or requirement to increase the BAME community's understanding of the role of solid organ transplantation, and the registries. And in the United Kingdom, there are two types of registry: donor and non-donor. In around the activities, the objective was fulfilled through one of the objectives or the initiative was fulfilled through broadcasting, web conferencing, workshops, and publications. And in around 2013 and March 2014, the Lord Mayor of Bristol at that, then, and the initiative collaborators took part in a live debate on blood and solid organ transplantation, on a community radio station, being Ujima Radio 98 FM, with further follow-up interviews in 2014, in which a patient, a carer, a donor coordinator from the North Bristol NHS Trust discussed perspectives and experiences. The lawmayor and campaign collaborators were also interviewed on a community radio station, BCFM 93.2 FM, in 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 uh, in around the latter parts of 2013 and early 2014. 2014, during a program highlighting the requirement for BAME individuals to join up to the solid organ transplant register or registers. And on World Kidney Day, what was referred to as World Kidney Day 2013, NHS Kidney Care hosted a series of e-learning sessions on acute kidney injury, and organ transplantation donation awareness. Two community champion training workshops took place in the same year, hosted by the Southwest Organ Donation and NHS Blood and Transplant blood donation teams. Articles were written and published to follow the radio events. Two campaign champions talks about experiences on waiting for a transplant on a BBC on a BBC Points West news. And finally, a stand was organised at the Bristol City at the Bristol City Hall, where the NHS BTO and NHS Blood and Transplant donation team raised awareness on blood and organ donation in BAME groups, and provided visitors with information on the Lord Mayor's campaign, the Lord Mayor's campaign and sort of initiative. Uh, that draws this audio podcast to a close. The subsequent audio podcasts as part of this series will go into the awareness. So looking at the awareness and the promotion aspects of this of the initiative, and as part of peer-reviewed and published works from 2015, 2016. That draws this audio podcast to a close. This has been an audio podcast as part of the Spectra Dossier. This audio podcast is part of a SZtorm. This audio podcast is part of a SZtorm, and this audio podcast is part of a Storm Robotics production.